The Velkin Dominion didn't just conquer worlds. They erased them from the map of resistance. 47 star systems had fallen to their might, and not once had they tasted defeat. Their warriors, the Crimson Talons, were the stuff of nightmares across the galaxy. Picture this. 3 meters of pure engineered death, bodies reinforced with biometal that could deflect plasma fire, reflexes so fast they moved like ghosts in combat. These weren't just soldiers. They were apex predators wearing armor. When humanity's diplomatic envoy rejected the Dominion's demand for annexation, most species would have sent negotiators. Maybe trade sanctions. Perhaps a show of force near the border. But High Commander Threxus didn't believe in half measures. He looked at the human response, crumpled it like worthless paper and called for his finest. The Talon Guard. 300 warriors who had fought in every major campaign of the last decade. Not one had ever been killed in action. Not one. Their target seemed almost insulting in its simplicity. Kepler 442b. A mining colony sitting on the edge of human space. Population, 8,000. Military presence, minimal. Just some security personnel to handle the occasional equipment dispute or bar fight. Intelligence reports showed civilian miners, basic infrastructure, and absolutely nothing that should trouble the elite forces of the Dominion. It was supposed to be a statement. A demonstration. Conquer one human world, watch the rest fall in line like dominoes. The Talons landed at dawn. Their drop ships screamed through the atmosphere with the kind of precision that comes from 1,000 successful invasions. Commander Krell stood in the command vessel, watching his tactical displays light up with target locations. He'd done this so many times before. The pattern never changed. Land, advance, accept surrender, move on. He estimated 4 hours. Maybe 6 if the humans were stubborn. Then he'd be filing his after-action report and requesting his next assignment. But something felt wrong from the moment boots hit dirt. The colony was quiet. Not evacuated quiet. Not panicked quiet. Just waiting. Like the whole place was holding its breath. The mines had gone dark. No distress signals screaming into space. No evacuation shuttles burning atmosphere trying to escape. Nothing. Just silence. Krell had encountered fear before. He knew what it looked like when a population realized they were about to be conquered. People ran. They hid. They begged. They didn't just stand there in complete silence, waiting for you to come find them. It was curious, sure, but he wasn't concerned. Humans were barely a century into galactic society. They were children playing at being spacefaring. What could they possibly do against the most feared military force in known space? He split his forces with the efficiency of long practice. 3 strike teams. Standard suppression pattern. Alpha team would secure the residential sectors. Beta would take the industrial zones. Gamma would control the mining operations themselves. Textbook. Simple. Effective. They moved out with weapons ready, every step coordinated through neural links that made them operate like a single organism. The streets were empty. Completely empty. Buildings sat undisturbed, doors hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. Equipment lay where it had been dropped. In the residential sector, Alpha team found breakfast still sitting on tables, going cold. Like everyone had just stood up mid-meal and walked away. Commander Krell received the reports with growing irritation. Where were they? He ordered his teams deeper into the colony. Then Alpha team found them. Not hiding. Not cowering in basements or locked in panic rooms. Standing in the main square of the residential sector. Miners in their work gear, faces dirty with dust and sweat, hands empty of weapons. Just standing there. Waiting. Maybe 200 of them, arranged in no particular formation, looking for all the world like they were waiting for a shift change rather than an invasion force. Krell approached with his command squad, weapons trained on the crowd. He'd give them one chance. That was protocol. Surrender now, avoid bloodshed, make this easy. Through his translator, he broadcast the standard message. By order of the Velkin Dominion, this colony is now under our jurisdiction. Lay down any weapons and submit to processing. Resistance will be met with lethal force. The miners didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't even look particularly worried. Then one of them stepped forward. An older human, maybe 50 Earth years, with gray in his beard and scars on his hands that spoke of decades working underground. His eyes had that look Krell had seen before in veteran soldiers, not civilians. A kind of calm that came from knowing exactly what you were doing and why. The human looked up at Krell's 3-meter frame, studied the advanced armor, noted the weapons trained on his chest, and smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a scared smile. Something else entirely. Then he spoke 5 words in perfect Velkin, words he'd clearly practiced just for this moment. You picked the wrong colony. Krell almost laughed. Almost. But something in the way the human said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, made him pause. Behind the old miner, the others stood perfectly still, and Krell realized they weren't afraid at all. They were ready. For what, he couldn't imagine. But as he gave the order to advance and secure the prisoners, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years of conquest. A whisper of doubt. The battle started exactly how every Velkin tactical manual said it would. The Crimson Talons moved like a machine, every warrior knowing their role, their position, their field of fire. Plasma bolts lit up the streets as they advanced on hastily constructed barricades. The miners returned fire with mining lasers and improvised weapons, nothing that should have troubled warriors in advanced combat armor. Krell watched his tactical display and nodded with satisfaction. This would be over soon. Then the first strange thing happened. The humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to delay. Every barricade was positioned not to hold ground, but to funnel the Talons toward specific locations. Every retreat was calculated, drawing the warriors deeper into the colony's infrastructure. Krell noticed but didn't worry. Desperation made species do foolish things. Let them run into their holes. He'd dig them out. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations, though the Valkans would never admit it publicly. The Talons started disappearing. Not dying. Not retreating. Just vanishing. It began with a single warrior from Beta Team. He reported entering a warehouse to clear it. His vitals were strong, his location beacon active. Then nothing. Silence. When his squad went to investigate, they found his armor lying on the floor, empty, like he'd simply evaporated out of it. Krell sent a retrieval team. That team found the armor, called it in, and then their signals went dark too. One by one. Like candles being snuffed out. By the time Krell pulled the rest of Beta Team back, he'd lost 6 warriors. 6. In less than 20 minutes. And he didn't have a single body to show for it. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just empty armor scattered across the warehouse floor like discarded shells. Alpha Team reported similar problems in the residential towers. They'd breach a building, clear the first floor, move to the second, and discover that the warriors they'd left guarding the entrance were gone. Just gone. Weapons lying on the ground. Armor intact. But no warriors. The buildings weren't even that large. Where could they be going? Krell ordered the teams to pair up, never leave anyone alone. The disappearances slowed but didn't stop. Now they were losing pairs. By nightfall of the first day, Krell was looking at his tactical display with growing unease. 40 warriors missing. 40. The Talon Guard had never lost 40 warriors in a single campaign, let alone a single day. And the truly terrifying part? He still hadn't seen most of the enemy. The miners they'd encountered in the square had vanished the moment fighting started, melting into the colony like water into sand. His forces were fighting ghosts. The second day brought understanding, and with it, a cold fear that Krell would never admit to his superiors. His teams discovered that the entire colony was honeycombed with passages. Not just the official mining tunnels marked on their intelligence maps. Hidden corridors behind false walls. Maintenance shafts that connected every building. Crawl spaces that ran beneath streets. The whole place was a three-dimensional maze, and the humans knew every single passage while the Talons stumbled through blind. Gamma Team, pushing into the actual mining complex, found out why. The colony records told a story that intelligence had completely missed. Kepler 442b wasn't just any mining operation. It had been founded by families from Earth's deepest cave rescue operations. Third and fourth generation descendants of people who'd spent their lives crawling through spaces most species couldn't even imagine entering. These people had been born in tight spaces. Raised breathing recycled air. Trained from childhood to navigate by touch and sound when light failed. One team leader, a veteran named Vex who'd fought in 12 campaigns, reported something that made Krell's blood run cold. They'd captured a young human woman, maybe 25 years old, found her trapped in a collapsed tunnel section. Or so they thought. She'd looked terrified, called for help, and when 3 Talons entered the narrow passage to extract her, she'd simply smiled and pressed a detonator. The tunnel collapsed with surgical precision, cutting off exactly that section, trapping the warriors in a space too small for their 3-meter frames to maneuver. Then she'd vanished through a gap in the rubble that a Velkin couldn't have fit through even without armor. When they finally cut through to rescue their warriors, they found them alive but separated from their equipment, sitting in the dark, waiting. The humans had extracted them through passages the Valkans couldn't follow, taken their weapons and armor, and left them unharmed. One warrior reported that the young woman had returned, slid water and food through a gap, and told them in broken Velkin, "Wait here. Someone will find you. We're not monsters." Krell began to understand what he was facing. This wasn't a conventional military force. This was an entire population that had turned their home into a weapon. Every building was a trap. Every tunnel had 3 exits the Valkyns couldn't see. Every piece of industrial equipment had been modified, turned into something dangerous. The mining lasers they dismissed as primitive? Powerful enough to cut through armor at close range. The excavation charges? Placed with precision that suggested the humans knew the geology of their world down to the molecular level. By dawn of the second day, Krell had lost 97 warriors. 97 of the finest soldiers the Dominion had ever produced, defeated by civilians. By miners. And he still hadn't managed to hold a single strategic position. Every building his forces secured would be undermined, literally, the ground beneath it collapsing into tunnels his sensors hadn't detected. Every strong point would be isolated, cut off from support, until his warriors had to withdraw or risk being buried alive. The reports kept coming in. Third Squad found themselves in a section of the residential area where every door had been rigged. Not with explosives. With something worse. Sliding panels that separated warriors from their units. Corridors that rotated, turning what looked like a straight path into a maze. One warrior reported walking through a doorway and ending up 3 levels down in the mining complex, with no idea how he'd gotten there. High Commander Threxus, watching from orbit, demanded explanations. Krell had none to give. How do you explain that civilians had defeated his elite forces? How do you report that the humans had studied Velkin psychology so well they designed their defenses around it? The warriors expected direct combat, so the humans gave them none. They expected fortified positions, so every position was temporary. They expected fear, and instead found people who seemed almost amused by their presence. In the command center that night, Krell made a decision that would haunt him. He still had over 200 warriors. The humans couldn't have more than a few thousand defenders, and most of those were untrained civilians. He would call for orbital support, bombardment of the mining sectors, flush them out of their holes and end this humiliation. He sent the request up the chain of command and waited for approval. What he didn't know was that the humans were waiting too. Waiting for him to make exactly that mistake. Retry. One of her squad leaders, a warrior named Tren, reported something that made Vex's blood run cold. They'd found a chamber deep in the mining complex. Inside were supplies, medical equipment, food stores, water purification, and a simple note in Velkin, for the prisoners. We keep our promises. When you're ready to talk instead of fight, use the radio frequency below. The humans weren't trying to kill them. They were trying to teach them. Show them that this colony, this single settlement of 8,000 civilians, could tie up 500 of the Dominion's finest warriors indefinitely. Could capture them, hold them, release them, recapture them, all without a single fatality on either side. It was humiliating. It was impossible. And it was working. Vex stood in what remained of her command post and made the call she never thought she'd make. She requested emergency extraction. All forces. Immediate withdrawal. High Commander Threxus demanded an explanation. Vex could only send him the casualty reports. 483 warriors missing. 17 made it back to the ships. And somewhere in the depths of Kepler 442b, the humans were broadcasting a new message on all frequencies. We are human. We do not surrender our homes. Send your warriors if you must. We'll send them back when we're done teaching them respect. High Commander Threxus stood in the war room of his flagship, staring at numbers that refused to make sense. 500 Crimson Talons deployed. 17 returned. 483 missing. Not dead. Missing. Against a mining colony. Against civilians. The other commanders stood in silence around the tactical display, none willing to speak first. How do you explain losing the Dominion's most elite fighting force to people who dug rocks out of the ground for a living? The broadcast from the colony played on repeat. That human voice, calm and almost cheerful, announcing to the entire sector that they'd captured nearly 500 Velkin warriors. That they were holding them safe and sound. That the Dominion could send more if they wanted, but the result would be the same. Threxus had ordered communications to jam the signal, but it was too late. Every species within 50 light-years had picked it up. The message was spreading through the galactic network like wildfire. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within hours. Species that had trembled at the mention of the Velkin Dominion suddenly had questions. Pointed questions. If humans could defeat the Crimson Talons, what did that say about Velkin military superiority? Were the Valkyns really the unstoppable force they claimed to be, Or had they just been lucky that nobody had fought back effectively before? The political damage was catastrophic. The Velkin ambassador tried damage control. Called it a fluke. Said the humans had used dishonorable tactics, fought like cowards, hidden in their tunnels instead of meeting the Talons in open combat. But the council members weren't buying it. A representative from the Thalian Collective, a species that had narrowly avoided Velkin conquest 3 years prior, asked a simple question. Did the humans not offer terms before the invasion? Did they not release prisoners unharmed? Did they not provide multiple warnings? Who exactly is being dishonorable here? The ambassador had no answer. Because the footage existed. The communications logs existed. Every species could see that humanity had tried diplomacy first. Had offered peaceful solutions. Had only fought when the Valkans landed troops. And critically, humanity had captured hundreds of warriors without killing a single one. That wasn't cowardice. That was restraint combined with tactical brilliance. A combination that terrified species far more than simple brutality ever could. The Galactic Council announced an investigation team would travel to Kepler 442b. The Valkans protested. This was an internal military matter. The Council disagreed. When one species invades another and loses 500 soldiers, that becomes everyone's concern. Especially when those soldiers are allegedly still alive and being held by the defenders. The investigation team launched within the day. They arrived at Kepler 442b expecting a war zone. Expecting devastation and fortifications and armed camps. Instead, they found the colony functioning normally. Humans working the mines, processing or going about their daily lives like nothing had happened. The team leader, a neutral observer from the Centauri Alliance named Keth, requested a meeting with colony leadership. A woman named Rachel Foster met them at the landing pad. She was the colony administrator, a job that apparently involved managing or quotas and defending against invasion forces with equal competence. She welcomed the investigation team warmly, offered them refreshments and asked how she could help. When Keth asked about the Velkin warriors, Rachel smiled and said, "Oh, they're fine. A bit bored maybe. We've been teaching some of them Earth games to pass the time. Would you like to see them?" The holding facility was deep underground, in chambers that had been mining operations before being converted. The investigators expected dungeons, cells, prisoners in chains. What they found instead looked more like an underground town. Large communal spaces. Sleeping quarters that were simple but clean. Medical facilities where a human nurse named Amy was treating a Velkin warrior's infected wound with the same care she'd give anyone. Kitchen areas where a cook named Danny was preparing food compatible with Velkin biology, actually asking the prisoners about their preferences. The captured Talons themselves seemed confused about their situation. They were prisoners, yes. Disarmed and held against their will. But they were also being treated with a level of respect that most of them had never experienced even in their own military. A young warrior named Drex, barely 20 cycles old, told the investigators something that would be quoted across the galaxy. "They don't hate us. They're disappointed in us. Like we're children who should have known better." The humans gave the investigation team complete access. Showed them the tunnel networks that had made the defense possible. Explained every tactic, every trap, every strategic decision. A geologist named David walked them through the mining operations, showing how the entire colony was built with defensive contingencies from the start. "We're from Earth," he explained. "Our ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, wars that lasted generations. We plan for the worst and hope for the best." A young woman named Katie, barely out of her teens, demonstrated the demolition system she designed. Precision charges that could collapse specific tunnels while leaving others intact. Seismic sensors that tracked every footstep in the colony. Automated systems that could reconfigure entire sections of the underground network. The investigators realized they were looking at defensive engineering that would take most species decades to develop. The humans had built it in 3 years just in case. But the real revelation came when the humans presented their demand. They'd compiled detailed tactical analysis of every engagement with the Talons. Armor weaknesses. Predictable movement patterns. Communication vulnerabilities. Psychological profiles. Data that would make the unstoppable Crimson Talons very stoppable indeed. And they had one simple offer. The Velkin Dominion would formally recognize human sovereignty and leave human space alone, or this information would be distributed freely to every species in the galaxy. Keth asked the obvious question. Why didn't you just kill them? You had 500 enemy combatants at your mercy. Why go through the trouble of keeping them alive? An older human, the one named Jake Torres who'd spoken the first defiant words, answered. Because we're not trying to prove we're the strongest. We're proving that we're not prey. There's a difference. Any species can kill. It takes something else to capture 500 enemy soldiers without losing a single one of them, and to treat them well while you're doing it. We wanted to send a message to the galaxy. Humanity will defend itself absolutely, but we're not barbarians. The investigation team filed their report within the week. The Velkin Dominion had invaded human territory without provocation, had ignored diplomatic overtures, had lost their elite forces to a civilian population defending their home. And critically, the humans had demonstrated both the capability and the restraint to capture rather than kill. The political implications were clear. Humanity was a species that could fight like demons when threatened, but chose mercy when they could afford it. That combination terrified the Dominion far more than simple military might ever could. Because it meant humanity wouldn't just fight wars. They'd win the peace that followed. And in galactic politics, that mattered more than any number of warriors. High Commander Threxus stood before the Velkin Dominion Council in the Grand Chamber, a place where conquerors reported victories and generals received honors. Today it felt more like a courtroom. The council members sat in their elevated seats, looking down at him with expressions that ranged from anger to disgust. He'd commanded the finest military force in the known galaxy. He'd sent 500 Crimson Talons against a mining colony. And he'd lost them all to civilians. Not lost to heroic last stands. Not lost in glorious combat. Lost to capture. By miners. The word echoed through the chamber like an accusation. Miners. The political fallout was already catastrophic. 3 allied species had quietly withdrawn their support agreements. 2 more were requesting renegotiation of their treaties. The Velkin position as the dominant military power in the sector was crumbling, and all because humans had proven that the unstoppable Talons could be stopped by people who dug ore for a living. The council demanded answers. How had this happened? What tactical errors had been made? Threxus could have blamed Krell. Could have blamed Vex. Could have pointed to intelligence failures or unexpected human capabilities. But he was Velkin, and Valkins didn't make excuses. He stood straight and told them the truth. We underestimated them. We saw civilians and assumed weakness. We were wrong. The Galactic Council's investigation report landed like a bomb in the political arena. It confirmed everything the humans had claimed. Showed the diplomatic messages the Valkins had ignored. Detailed the restraint humans had shown in combat. Documented the treatment of prisoners. And most damaging of all, it included testimony from returned Talons that contradicted the official Velkin narrative. The humans hadn't fought dishonorably. They'd fought smart. There was a difference. One testimony in particular spread across every news network in the galaxy. A warrior named Drex, young and honest in the way that only the inexperienced can be, describing his time in captivity. They gave us food. Real food, not rations. A human named Bobby taught me a game called chess. He said it was about thinking 3 moves ahead. I didn't understand at first, but then I realized that's what they'd done to us. They'd thought 3 moves ahead from the moment we landed. Maybe 10 moves ahead. We were playing checkers while they were playing chess. He described how a cook named Danny had asked about Velkin dietary needs and adjusted recipes to accommodate them. How a mechanic named Julie had shown him human engineering techniques, not to brag, but because she was genuinely interested in comparing methods. How they'd been treated not as hated enemies, but as opponents who'd made a mistake and could learn from it. The human Jake Torres told me something, Drex said in the recording. He said, "We don't hate you. We just needed you to understand that we're not going to roll over because you showed up with big guns and scary armor. Come back when you're ready to talk like civilized people." The council debated for 3 days. Some members wanted to escalate. Send a full battle fleet. Show humanity what real Velkin power looked like. But others, the ones who'd actually read the intelligence reports, asked uncomfortable questions. If miners could capture 500 Talons, what could actual human soldiers do? What would happen if humanity shared their tactical data with other species? What if every race the Dominion had conquered suddenly had a blueprint for defeating Crimson Talons? The mathematics were brutal. The Dominion controlled territory through the threat of the Talons. Take away that mystique, that aura of invincibility, and the whole structure collapsed. Already they were seeing signs. Resistance movements on conquered worlds were getting bolder. Species that had accepted Velkin rule were asking questions. If humans could say no and make it stick, why couldn't they? A counselor named Vrek, old enough to remember when the Dominion was just one world among many, spoke the words that changed everything. We have 2 choices. We can escalate and risk losing everything, or we can negotiate and save what we still have. Pride is worthless if we lose the Dominion in the process. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. The Velkin Dominion would sue for peace. For the first time in their expansionist history, they would negotiate with a species they tried to conquer. The humiliation was profound, but the alternative was worse. They sent a delegation to Kepler 442b with one goal: get the prisoners back and prevent the tactical data from being distributed. The negotiations took place in the same central square where Jake Torres had spoken his defiant words. The humans could have chosen anywhere, could have made the Valkans come to some underground bunker, but they picked open air and sunlight, making a point perhaps that they had nothing to hide. The human delegation was led by Rachel Foster, the colony administrator, along with several other civilians who'd helped coordinate the defense. The Valkans expected demands: territory, resources, reparations. What they got instead was simpler and somehow more cutting. Formal recognition of human sovereignty, a treaty guaranteeing non-aggression, and a public apology. The Velkin delegation protested the last point. Apologies were for the weak. Rachel just smiled and said, "Then I guess we keep your warriors and release the tactical data. Your choice." The Kepler Accord was signed 1 week later. The Velkin Dominion formally recognized humanity as a sovereign power with protected borders. They issued a public statement acknowledging that the invasion had been unjustified. And in exchange, the humans returned all 437 prisoners, unharmed, with detailed medical records showing they'd been properly cared for. The tactical data remained sealed, held in escrow by the Galactic Council, to be released only if the Valkans violated the treaty. The returned warriors were debriefed extensively. Most refused to speak about their captivity in detail, which made their commanders suspicious of brainwashing or coercion. But the medical scans showed nothing. The warriors were healthy, well-fed, and psychologically sound. They just didn't want to talk about it. Eventually, bits and pieces emerged. Stories that didn't fit the narrative of human brutality the Dominion wanted to tell. A warrior named Trev described how a human nurse named Amy had stayed up all night monitoring his allergic reaction to something in the local water, adjusting treatments until she got it right. A squad leader named Kess talked about playing cards with a miner named Mike, learning about human family structures and realizing they weren't that different from Velkin ones. Another warrior mentioned that when he'd expressed fear that his family would think him dead, a human named Lisa had personally sent a message through back channels assuring them he was alive and well. These weren't the stories of a brutal enemy. These were stories of a species that had made a calculated decision: show strength through capability, not cruelty. Prove they could win without becoming monsters in the process. And it worked. Within months, the Kepler Accord became the template for how humanity interacted with other species. Firm on sovereignty. Willing to defend themselves absolutely. But always leaving room for dignity and negotiation. Jake Torres was interviewed by a Galactic News network 6 months after the accord was signed. The reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered: why didn't you kill them? You had every right. They invaded your home. Jake looked tired, like the weight of what they'd done was finally settling on his shoulders. Because we're human, he said simply. We remember everything. Every war. Every genocide. Every time we let anger turn us into the thing we were fighting against. We learned, painfully, that winning isn't about being the cruelest or the strongest. It's about being too stubborn to lose and smart enough to know that how you win matters as much as whether you win. He paused, looking directly into the camera. The Valkans will never attack human space again. Not because we destroyed them. Because we showed them we could destroy them and chose not to. That's power. Real power. The kind that lasts. The Velkin Dominion never attempted another human conquest. And when younger warriors asked why, the veterans would pull up the casualty reports from Kepler 442b and say simply, because those were miners. Just miners. And they beat our best without breaking a sweat. Imagine what their actual soldiers could do.